All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome joining us, in this webinar, all right? Strategies to counter the ransomware threat in APJ. So my name is Keith. I'm the field CTO for APJ. All right. So mainly my role here in Veeam is really to evangelize solutions, technologies, and more importantly, to address the business challenges that organizations face. And of course, today, great pleasure that I'm together with David. All right. So David, maybe you want to do a quick introduction of yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So my name's David. I'm the field CISO for APJ here at Veeam. And like Keith, I'm talking with organizations to help align their security strategy with their resilience posture. So great to be here. Thanks.
Yep, thanks. So let's go on to the next slide. And basically, it's the agenda rundown that we'll be doing through or covering through in this webinar. So basically, we'll just run through the APJ threat and regulatory landscape, and then we'll follow on with, specific to APJ, our regulatory overview and what are the common themes. And more importantly, of course, is how Veeam will align to compliance and best practices. We'll do a show and tell, a little bit of use case demo, and we'll close off the session with a quick summary and also some next steps that you all can also take with us right post after the webinar as well. So maybe David, let's start off with the first topic, right? With you leading in terms of the ransomware and regulatory landscape.
Thanks, Keith. So if we look back at 2025, Allianz released this barometer view at the beginning of the year, talking about cyber incidents being the #1 business risk. And I think, Keith, if we look back, that's really come to fruition this year, particularly with the types of attacks we've seen. At the time we're recording this, I think the most recent one, we saw a substantial attack in Japan of a large beverage organization. And we can see that the attackers are really focusing on disrupting business to cause maximum impact. And then, in fact, that organization, they had production plants impacted, they were taken down, their delivery network was interrupted, and even other players in that space and even their competition weren't even able to fulfill the demand. So we've really seen a shift to some really high impact, large brand names being impacted this year on cyber incidents. So I think this barometer's come true, and we've seen that happen with the types of attacks we've been seeing, both on the ransomware side and even large data exfiltration attacks. If we spend a little bit of time just looking back at what we've seen change in this space, and a lot of these observations come from our Coveware team, law enforcement's made a bit of an impact now in terms of disrupting some of the tactics and the workings of the threat actor groups. The good news is we have seen a decline in payments, particularly on ransomware payments and extortion payments. So organizations, I think, are placing less trust in the attackers and realizing that a payment doesn't necessarily guarantee a good outcome. Attackers are really shifting their tactics. And so we're seeing now a lot of ransomware as a service platforms coming to the foray. We see attack groups teaming up and working together where they're leveraging each other's strengths, and a lot of social engineering innovation, if you like, coming from the attackers in the way that they're impersonating support desks or impersonating employees. Big topic for today, of course, is the regulations and the way those have been shifting, and regulators trying to step in to help drive the urgency. Of course, critical vulnerabilities are still a big part of the exploitation there of getting in, and we still see this intense focus on ESXi environments and those VMware environments where oftentimes we're seeing the hypervisors and the backup environments being part of that. So a lot happening this year, Keith, in terms of what we're seeing happening there.
Definitely.
When it comes to regulations, right, and we'll dive into this a little bit more, but a lot of time when it comes to talking about regulations, there's a lot of focus on Europe and what's been happening there, but it's not just Europe. We have such a vast and diverse environment for regulators here in Asia Pacific. And if we look across, more than 20 countries in our sort of population of APAC already are leveraging some form of cybersecurity legislation, whether it's a Cybersecurity Act or something similar. They've already got data protection and privacy regulations in place. And we've seen this lean in for most countries now to really focus on those most important parts of the industry that are supporting citizens, critical infrastructure, things like water and energy. And I think the big question then is, why are we seeing this now? What do you think? What do you see, Keith?
Yeah, I think if you see in the slide as well, I think number one, we really see a lot of the increasing frequency of the cyber attacks, right? Just like the
Yeah.
one you mentioned, but there's a lot more going on, especially across the APJ world that we are in. And I think the sophistication in terms of the cyber attacks, right, with the introduction of AI, right, a lot of things are done a lot smarter now. It's a lot more automated. And with this huge automation with smartness that AI brings across, that really, bring us to a different level of the cyber attack scenes that we're actually seeing. And definitely we move on to in terms of protection of critical infrastructure and also essential services, like the earlier slide that David was also mentioning, right? I think the essential services that was being hugely or largely disrupted really brings down, the businesses. It destroys trust. And that's where we are talking about how do we or how can we actually protect all the critical infrastructure to ensure that the essential services are always online. And of course, enhancement on cyber resilience. I think we have done a lot of these workshops together, across APJ. And we often also see that there's a lot of investment that's being done, especially in terms of technology, trying to enhance their cyber resilience posture. But
Yeah.
then again, we also have a lot of discussion around this, and we were also saying, with the large amount of investments that we're putting in, are we only looking at technology to enhance our cyber resilience posture, right? So I think this is something that we probably need to dive deeper as well. But all these kind of sum up back also to regulatory compliance and accountability, right? So when a ransomware attack happens, right, what should you do, right, from a company perspective? And of course, with the regulations that we're gonna also show later on, those are also regulations that is being formed in the respective countries across APJ that also helps us to increase our cyber resilience posture.
It's a good point. So maybe we take a moment, we can dive into that a little bit more, Keith, and look at
Sure.
some of these countries.
Sure. So I think if you look at the slide in terms of the latest regulatory requirements, so you can see there's 5 countries across, and Veeam actually has released the white papers across in our website. And within the white paper itself, of course, number one, we not only state the respective regulatory requirements, so you could see like across Australia, Singapore, India, Indonesia, or Hong Kong. So they do have different like cybersecurity acts, right? Or even from Singapore perspective, like the MAS Technology Risk Management Guidelines. But I think what in the white paper that's kind of good to look out for is then how do we map this to a ransomware incident life cycle, right? So on the next table that you see, of course, is how do we map the incident life cycle from a stage perspective in accordance to meeting with the regulatory requirements as well. And perhaps, David, you also want to kind of share your thoughts, right? Across all these, I believe we do see commonalities across a lot, right?
We
But it
do,
could be just
absolutely.
some differences across in terms of wordings or in terms of some processes that we are kind of working on as well.
Yeah, you're right. We've seen a lot of existing regulations being changed. I mean, in Australia, we've seen the Cybersecurity Act be modified to focus a bit more on mandatory reporting around ransomware payments. You mentioned Singapore. We've got now the health info bill there. We've got changes happening in India and Hong Kong. And to your point, you see there's a lot of commonality, even though we've got this highly fragmented regulatory environment across APAC. And if we look at the commonality that spans across each of these, we can sort of summarize this a little bit more, I think, Keith, into some of the key areas that I know you're going to be touching on later on. So maybe you wanted to sort of talk about some of the commonality that we've summarized here.
Yeah, so I think the common APJ regulatory teams that you see here in the green box, I think number one I'll probably pick on will be immutable, right? So we are talking about backups, but in immutable form. So in short, it's basically write once, read many. Nobody can actually modify the contents of the backup because that will be your last line of defense. And also, we also dive a little bit on the segmented backup, and more importantly, right, when we are hit with ransomware attack scenarios, rapid recovery is always required, right? Because you want to bring the business back online. And from a breach, right, from a mandatory incident and breach reporting, I think that's where the regulation comes in as well, because whenever any organization gets hit with ransomware, there's also this portion of reporting that they need to do to the respective regulators,
That's
right? Of
right.
course, and timelines varies across different countries as well, right, David?
Absolutely. I mean, this can range from critical infrastructure in Australia being, 12 hours. Singapore, many of the critical infrastructure environments, they have an hour. There's a
Yep.
tight time frame, and this just puts all that additional pressure on organizations to get reporting out.
Yes. And perhaps probably two more that I'll run on will be the regular risk assessments and compliance audits, right? I think organizations, like I mentioned, how do we increase our cyber resilience or data resilience posture, right? It's really you need to do a lot of the risk assessments regularly in your organizations. And how do we look at fulfilling audits from a compliance standpoint? And of course, lastly, right, will be emphasis on automation, DR testing, as well as reporting, because we all know during any form of ransomware incidents, where there's a lot of panic, there's a lot of,
A lot of
discussion
chaos.
around what to
Yeah,
do and so on. You want technology to help you to do some forms of automation so that you avoid human error. And of course, regular DR testing. I think that's also something that we will keep emphasizing on, that you always need to be prepared, in terms of your data resilience readiness in any organization, so that you will know your data can be restored, your business can be bring online whenever you had any of the ransomware attacks in the organization.
for sure. Look, I think organizations clearly have a lot to be thinking about in terms of preparing for when that attack happens, particularly from a regulatory space. If we spend just a couple of minutes and take a look at what the attackers are doing, this can also help put us in a mindset to prepare for what could be happening. And so this information that we're providing now is real case data from our Q3 incidents from our Coveware team. And we track this ongoing, and it just sort of shows the movement and the way attackers are going after organizations. So in Q3, the cases that we handled, nearly 90% of them involved an encryption event. And a lot of that was threat actors, particularly our top threat actor groups, leveraging exploitable vulnerabilities in firewalls and remote access services and coming in and performing encryption events and then demanding payment for the ransom for the decryption key. But we also saw a high volume, 85% in fact, which were exfiltrated data attacks. And so attackers now are finding they don't necessarily need to focus on that encryption event to apply pressure. They can merely exfiltrate the data and come back and demand payment to suppress the publishing of that data. And that, again, puts organizations in a really difficult position on making a decision. So 74% involved both. So we've really seen, Keith, I think this shift where the attackers are still using encryption, and I think it's still a critical part of ransomware attacks, but there are a lot of attacks now where the exfiltration piece alone is being used as coercion in order to extract a payment. But of course, the objective of most of these attackers continues to be the crown jewels of the organization, which is your backups. 90% of the attacks that are happening are still targeting to impact your backup environments. And the data that we're seeing throughout, I think the past 12 months, right, we're seeing that 66% of those attacks were successful in compromising those backup environments. And we're seeing that 34% of the repositories were modified or deleted. So these are big numbers, right, in terms of talking about the impact on the key lever that organizations have in terms of their recovery effort. The other alarming piece here is that oftentimes organizations will say, well, we have stated our RTO and our RPO SLAs, we've reported these to our boards, right? But less than 20% recovering the majority of the servers they originally planned. So this is a big gap, right?
Definitely a big gap.
So why is this happening? Well, I think maybe this is an area you and I can dig into a bit more, Keith. But when
Yeah,
it
sure.
comes to organizations, they say we have a recovery plan or we have a response plan, but we're seeing gaps, right?
Definitely. So I think in the charts you also see, right, the two highest ranking in terms of the frequent backup verifications, right? And I always share this with customers or partners as well. When you do a backup and at the end of the day, backup completes, showing successful, that is not the end of the backup stages, right? Because just imagine today, if you have a backup that's done like 5 years ago and you want to restore something and you can't restore, there's nobody can turn back time. So that's where we always want to look at how do you use technology or even processes to make sure that backups that you take, you're able to do verification in one way or the other, and also backup copies and even ensuring that it's a clean copy for you to restore. So probably just a quick story. I do have like a customer that they only have backups that's being stored on premise in one location for 7 days. And of course, they were infected or attacked by a ransomware threat actor. And what they did was basically, number one, they deleted all the virtual machines, which is the production environment. And subsequently, what they have done in the previous slide, as you mentioned, is they also started to encrypt all the backups that were stored in the backup targets. Right. So in that, when you are seeing this kind of attack, right, what they are really trying to do is to put you out of business, because number one, they ensure that you cannot function with all your production workloads being compromised. Second is to cut off your last line of defense. And because they only have a copy of their backup data in one location, they don't have additional backup copies where you could, store it offline in a tape format, or now a lot of customers are actually storing data off into S3 object storage base, right? And more importantly, from a recovery standpoint, right, I think not only should we be doing frequent backup verification, you should also ensure whenever you are doing any form of recovery, it should be a clean copy, because you do not want a infected copy to be restored back to the environment, and you start to have the same disruption that you're facing with another chapter of ransomware attacks in the organization.
Right. Yeah, I think that's important. You don't want to be sort of reinstating their persistence. The other big thing, and I know you and I go around talking about this a lot when we're doing workshops around APAC, but communication, that comes
Yes.
up as a common theme, right? In terms of not just the fact that it's communicating, but the commonality of the language, the aligned communication. I mean, that's another big component, right? In terms of having a core integral part of the response plan, knowing what to communicate, who's going to be communicating, the accountability of doing that.
Yes, and probably just the last point to kind of bring it back, right, is really talking about third-party specialist arrangements,
Yeah.
right? As example, hiring or engaging a negotiator, right? And I believe that's also something that we will cover on later on in the couple of few slides that's going on, and we'll probably explain a little bit more, right? Why negotiation is also important. So again, if we look at the three teams that we spoke about, so it's not only from a technology aspect of things, processes from a communication perspective, right? And also lastly, right, engaging a third party to help you tie through any form of ransomware attack.
Absolutely. And just from our research, just to sort of close the slide off, Keith, I think when we look across the organizations that we've worked with, many of them are only incorporating maybe 3 or 4 of these elements. So there's still a lot of work to be done with playbooks. So if we go back to the original table, I know there's an opportunity now for us to sort of demonstrate how Veeam's able to support organizations in this. So, Keith, how can we sort of maybe look at how we look at resilience and sort of tie this together and supporting this fragmented regulatory environment?
Sure. So I think before we kind of run into the demo aspect of things, I'll just kind of explain through the imperative of data resilience, right? So all organizations should be moving from a reactive to a continuous approach. And in Veeam, we have 5 main pillars that's there. So number one is data backup, because that's where we always want to make sure that your backups are always being verified. It's always made available to you, all right? Of course, it's always in the form of immutable as well, because you want to make sure that nobody modifies the backup data in your backup target, because you want to make sure that it should be restored and should be a clean copy. Then from a data recovery perspective, it's really talking about how do we meet the respective business RPOs, recovery point objective, and also recovery time objective, right? Because in any form of incident, whether it's going to be ransomware or it's just talking about specific workload that needs to be restored, I think these are where we are talking about how should we leverage Veeam, right? To make sure that you always have a form of data to be restored, and also when you can actually restore it at the fastest possible time. And from a data portability perspective is whenever any data is being protected by Veeam, we give you that avenue of moving the data however you want, right? So for example, today, if you are protecting a physical workload within your environment with Veeam, we give you the flexibility to say you want to move it to a virtual environment, right? You want to move it to the public cloud as well if you want to. And ultimately, because we do know that certain workloads are not the best suitable for cloud, you could also say, I want those workloads from the cloud to be restored back to on-premise, right? So this gives you that flexibility, and more importantly, there's no vendor lock-in. And the last two pillars from a data security perspective will be, how do we talk about, zero trust data resilience? And from a zero trust data resilience is really talking about, defensive and also offensive approach. So data security, and we have also added on a lot of functionality within our platform, so that we could share with you later on as well. And lastly, really is data intelligence, right? So as I first started off the session, we talk about AI, right? So we are also incorporating AI in terms of putting into our platform, and more importantly, using AI to know your data sets, and also to know where your risks and threats are as well. Right, so basically the 5 pillars of what Veeam is covering, that also sums up that data resilience posture that we're talking about.
So this is really helpful, and I think you mentioned key things here like data portability and this move to cloud, and you talked earlier about AI initiatives. So we're talking now beyond just APAC regulations, but even looking more globally. And I think what would be useful now is maybe you can help us understand, if we were to overlay these pillars of resilience and apply them across some more global looking regulations, maybe we can sort of see some commonality here around how they work together.
Yeah, so I think we started off as well earlier on. So I know in different regions that we have, whether it's in the Europe or in the US, we do have GDPRs, we have NIS2, we have DORA as well.
Yeah.
But with all these different laws that's there, we then map our 5 pillars into these respective categories. So you could see that in every of the pillar that we have, whether it's data backup, recovery, portability, security, intelligence, we are able to actually map this to all the regulations that outside of APJ. And what's more importantly is the same thing can also be applied across the APJ regulations as well.
Great. So I think there that the next question is, we've got this view now of how resilience maps to the regulations, the variety of regulators that we have across the region. I think a good transition now in terms of maybe you can go into a little bit more depth now on how Veeam is delivering on their commitment or our commitment around compliance and best practices. Share a little bit about that, and then we can start going into a bit more of a technical deep dive. So
Sure,
maybe you can
sure.
sort of talk a little bit about our trust center.
Yeah, so I think Trust Center is something that we have put it on our website. So if you go to veeam.com and you search for Trust Center, this is where it will bring you. So there's a URL link right at the bottom. And basically what Trust Center is saying, right, is it gives you or gives the audience what are the relevant industry standards and certifications that Veeam has actually achieved so far. And this Veeam security first approach, right? And how are we using this approach to protect our data? So you have all the respective certificates that we have achieved here, which is where Veeam takes data security really seriously, because our key aim is to ensure that your data is being protected. So that's kind of the first step we do from a trust center perspective.
Great. And I know we have some local regional ones that are included in here as
Yes.
well, some of the recent ones in Australia. So this is a great way of showing the transparency around that. You mentioned earlier about zero trust. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that applies?
Right. So I think from a zero trust data resilience, I can see in the diagram perspective, right? So today, from a resiliency domain that we kind of define, we will actually have different steps or different appliances that we put in, right? So number one, with our recent version 13 software appliance that we've launched, right? So this is basically a hardened appliance. And what's more importantly is this appliance itself contains both the operating system that we are building on Linux, as well as our Veeam binary. So meaning to say today, within this software appliance that Veeam is delivering, we are actually taking care of the respective operating system patches. Also, security patches, which is most important, as well as the updates to our Veeam backup replication binaries as well. And of course, with this software appliance, we will by default, right, disable your SSH, right, authentication in. We will by default enable your MFA, multi-factor authentication. Of course, then there will be voice authorization where we have actually included in the security officer as a role to approve of any task that the backup admin has submitted. So for example, today, if a backup admin says, he wants to delete away a repository that's storing all the backups data in the Veeam environment, right? By doing that, because it's a destructive action, right? It needs to be escalated up to a security officer to either approve or deny it. So the backup admin no longer has the ability to control everything within the backup infrastructure. Right. And then, of course, then we move on to resiliency domain number 2, right? So basically what we are talking about is we also have the capability to provision a Veeam hardened repository. All right. So within the Veeam hardened repository, customers do not need to know how do they manage a Linux environment, right? So it's a easily deployed appliance, and it's with single-use credentials, so you don't use root to kind of manage the repository. And again, all the operating system, patches are all managed by Veeam, and by default, SSH is disabled, meaning it says that the coverage from a secure perspective, the attack surface is actually a lot lesser. And of course, lastly, right, we also mentioned you shouldn't be only keeping a copy of data on premise or even only in the cloud, depending on where your infrastructure is. Right, that's where we also introduce in our Veeam Vault, right, is as a service where it's always immutable, it's always encrypted, and this is also one of offsite copy that the customer can leverage whenever they see or there's a need to do any form of recovery. Right, so basically that's, yeah.
This is great. And as a security guy, what gets me excited here, Keith, is we're seeing zero trust being implemented in a way that directly addresses what you mentioned, was that reduction in attack surface. And when we see attackers leveraging this trinity of identity and trust and access, that we're taking the burden off organizations and baking this kind of zero trust architecture directly into our solution. So maybe if you can now maybe just talk a little bit more about the orchestration components.
Yeah, so I think one of the parts that we talk about how Veeam can also help organizations, right, is using technology. So we do have technology that we call Veeam Recovery Orchestrator. And what this does is basically the ability to create plans, right? And within the plans, you can actually put in different type of workloads in order. And what we want to do that is to make sure that whenever there's any form of incident that happens within the environment, with the respective plans that's already in place, you should actually be able to just click on the plan and start the plan. And this will be always ready, all right? And when you're starting a plans, number one, you can first check, right, whether is the disaster recovery site is ready, all right? Do we have the network ready? Do you have the respective infrastructure ready? Whether it's from a backup repository, whether it's from a infrastructure perspective, let's say you are running on VMware, if all those components are ready before you can actually do a recovery, right? So you could also test this offline, meaning it says that today, even when your production system are running online, because we do support respective modes of doing this test, you can actually do a offline isolated testing to make sure that the entire process is being kept up to date, and also it's in compliance to your respective RTO and RPO as well, right? And more importantly, I think from a Veeam Recovery Orchestrator is the ability to give customers dynamic documentations. And why dynamic documentations is important is because we know that your data size and the workloads will always be only increasing and not decreasing. So today, if you have a new set of application or databases that's being rolled out into environment, you want to make sure that these are, number one, automatically included into this part of the plans that you're going to test. And secondly, is to able to give you the output, right, to show based on the new workloads that's being added into the environment, you are also actively testing it. And all this will give you in a form of documentation that's dynamic, that gives you all the latest updates in terms of the latest workloads that you have running in the environment. And maybe from a supported platform and applications, right? We do support Azure, vSphere, Hyper-V today, even physical workloads like Windows and Linux applications such as Exchange, SQL, SharePoint. And where you do storage is because we also do support storage replication, right? Because we are using the storage native replication technology to move your workloads from site A to site B, and also using that same technology to restore workloads from the storage layer using the recovery orchestrator. Right, and like I mentioned, the recovery documentation, which is dynamic. So this will be automatically generated as soon as you create a recovery plan. And you can see within the documentation itself, right? You'll be able to see where your respective backup server is, what name of the policy that's there. You'll be able to see some options, you know, what happens when you're recovering the machines and what happens when it fails. Also, of course, then the steps, right? We will also like run through where are the license that's available, right? Are you going to restore the VM? We will check the VM heartbeat network, the port readiness perspective, and also do a recovery. Right. So basically, on the right, you can see we start all the way from a plan definition to a readiness check in terms of your disaster recovery site. And then we can actually do the execution report, right? Whether it's responding to an actual incident or just from a half yearly audit that you do to meet your compliance. And also what data lab test report means is just a isolated environment that you do during your peacetime to make sure that you know whenever you are restoring or you need to recover in times of ransomware attack. That's where you know you are always ready to do any form of recovery when required.
Great for audit and compliance, like you said. Absolutely.
Yeah. So of course, then we give customers a really easy dashboard, right, to measure through your respective RPO and RTO that I mentioned earlier on. So you can see that there are also different logos that you see with a big red cross, which is you're not ready, and also with a big green tick that is being passed, because with this dashboard, you are also able to show it to your higher management team, right, especially to your stakeholders within the organization, you know, how ready you are. And it's not just about submitting documents and also saying that you can do it, but using technology again, where we help organizations to measure their RTO and RPO defined against their own desired targets, right, for each of the disaster recovery plan that you are developing. Because we all know that different workloads have different kind of measurements. And more importantly, I think this also gives you at a glance view in terms of how well are you complying, right, to your service level agreement.
Yeah, this is key. I think we mentioned this before, right? Is that a lot of organizations, they'll state their RTO and RPOs, but they won't test them until, you know, they're forced to through an incident. So this is a great way of demonstrating the commit to those. So I think what we're going to do now, Keith, is we're going to jump into a demo so you can show us all of that exciting stuff that we've been talking about, but putting into practice. So
Sure.
let me just move to the next slide here. And if you want to
Yep.
grab control, I'll hand it over to you.
Right. Let me just grab control of the screen.
Okay.
Hey.
Can see.
All right. Thanks. Let me just quickly do a login. Right. So first, like probably what I wanted to kind of quickly run through will be the different type of reports that you can extract off from our Veeam One monitoring dashboard. So this is what we call a threat center. Here you can actually see the respective data platform scorecard that you have, and more importantly is to tell you, right, from a visual perspective, is, you know, how well are you scoring from a backup infrastructure that you have. And probably the very first one that I'll run in will be the immutability status, right? Because I kind of keep mentioning about immutability. So what we can do is quickly generate through a report. And within the report itself, you know, they will actually show you or classify through what are the workloads that is done with immutability, right? We can actually classify them, whether it's how many of those are immutable, how many of those are mutable. right? We also give you a summary that you see here in terms of the total workloads that you see. There's 243 that's here. About out of the 243, 4 of them are with immutable workloads. And of course, your workload immutable ratio is really, really low. And within here, we also see where are the respective restore points that you can see as well. So a little more details if you run through the respective report data, right? So within the report data, as I expand it out, right? You're also able to see then the level of details from the workload type, from a name perspective, from what platform are you running, whether you're running VMware here, you see Hyper-V, Proxmox, and so on, whether are they immutable. And more importantly, from the in the immutability status, right? How many of those you have like available restore points? Because you can see the numbers that's here ranging from 8 to 31, or some even have 1 or 3, is to then let you know how far can you roll back, right? And we'll also give you the dates, right? Like when is the latest immutable restore points, and then when is it until as well, right? So pretty detailed report, I would say, right? Let me just go back again to Threat Center and discuss the report. Right, of course, the other one that I wanted to show is from a platform security perspective, right? We talk about how do we then show what is the backup security and compliance status that you have in your environment. Right, so within Veeam, again, we do have a very long list of comprehensive security best practices, as well as status that we will show off in a chart as well. So we can see here, which is not good, that there's a lot of these best practices are not being implemented. All right, of course, on the left, you will see that there's a total of 65. And of course, we can't do like 6 of them. And this has been last checked on 5 weeks ago. All right. So
I mean, that sounds like a key area that I'd want to be focusing in, right? I mean, that checklist is there and it's easy to get hold of, and I can see it visually. I mean, it's a great way to zero in on where to start.
Yes, definitely. So we can also see like the respective details that's there. So you can see that some of the check results I see, which is being passed, where you can reduce the risk of compromise. They should be stored in random memory locations, compliant with the 3-2-1 rule, and so on. But here you also can see that there are things that's not being implemented, such as configuration backup, right? Should be enabled to reduce the risk of data loss and manage the Veeam backup replication configuration. Did not implement email notification, right? Because these are very basic fundamentals that you not only need to look at the dashboard. There should be a form of email notification to enable to show what are the respective job status, right? Because a lot of time we all run backup during the night, right? And nobody will be kind of doing a remote in to check on the dashboard physically. So email notifications should be something that is also enabled. And of course, like the last one you can see right at the bottom that's not implemented is the hardened repository. So that's where we mentioned, right? We need to reduce the attack surface. So the hardened repository will be a backup target that you host on any physical machine, right? With local storage to ensure that all these backup data cannot be modified. And perhaps the last report that I will kind of run through will be a audit report, right? So you can see here there's a big range of reports that see you can actually generate any form of those that is listed here. And what I really want to run is the backup infrastructure audit report. You could specify periods, right, or ranges that you want. You could select different items, but for simplicity's sake, I will just preview through all the items that's there. So this was done like from the last 1 week. Let me just zoom in here. You can actually see the respective modification that's been done based on per user category. All right, so you can see as much as one user making modifications 36 times in the environment. So you will be keen to know what are the modifications that they're going to make as well, right? And of course here, let me just make sure that I go here to show it clearly. So you can see that for a initiator for the first one, like this Shiva, so what they have done is just added in additional credentials. The rest, you can see that application group domain controller has been modified. you will see a lot more credentials that has been added or encryption password being created and so on. Right, so this gives you a good sense of what has been happening, and more importantly, if you see the last one, is the configuration job has been modified. All right, so this then gives you advanced kind of behavioral pattern that you can also look at whenever you look at the reports from a audit perspective. Right. So I think back to here, if we also want to kind of drill in further, right, is Veeam only handles any data protection, even like while we are doing a backup inline scan, so that we know what's happening from a workload perspective. And of course, during recovery, right? So we're also able to scan the workloads to make sure that there's no, it's a clean copy before we even do a recovery. But what happens when we fall outside of the environment that you are not doing backup? Right, so here what you have is Coveware, right? So what David has mentioned earlier on. So basically, Coveware is a forensic tool, right? It's a lightweight forensic tool, and within this tool itself, they actually run, outside of the backup window. Let's say every day at 10 a.m. In the environment, and what they are doing is to pick up all the respective artifacts within the Veeam infrastructure environment, right, as well as Active Directory workloads. So the first step you see is what we call the triage inbox, and within this triage inbox, you can actually be classified into different form of criticality. All right, so it could be as critical as high, medium, or low, and it actually cuts across different landscape from a timeline perspective. You can see if I zoom in a little bit, right, where are the respective suspicious event that's happening. So you can see it spans through all the way from September to November timeframe. And if we will look at things a lot more in detail, we could go down into the reports. And into the reports itself, you will see actually two main reports that I will kind of focus in. Let me just zoom in to make sure you can see it. So you can see number one, the summary timeline events. And you can see on the summary timeline events, you can also move your cursors across to the green point. You can see that there's a lot of processes being created, all the way from September, even to the 1st of December that you can see in the timeline. And right at the bottom, you can actually see the different type of, like brute force attack, a firewall rule change, lateral movement, malware detection events, and so on. So there's a lot of the different types of attacks that a threat actor could have undertaken, right, to your environment. And what we do from a recon scanner, all right, is to then map this into a MITRE techniques. Right, so within the MITRE techniques, we will actually see the respective numbers that's here that relates to, like, for example, brute force attack, right? Network denial of service, of course, data destruction, and account manipulation, as well. And also like user execution, whether it's a malicious file and so on. So this gives you a good overview of kind of what's happening in the environment. And because it gives you like the whole full trend across a 3 months period that you see here, it gives you the ability or capability to do a lot more proactive kind of a approach in your environment, because we know, like what you mentioned, right? Ransomware or threat actors are getting a lot smarter now. So we probably got to outsmart them as well. David, anything you want to add on from here as well?
No, I think you've really reinforced the key point, right? Which was, you showed us a lot of the alerting and reporting that can happen as a result during backups and post backup. And I think this triage recon tool gives us a great view into some of those early warning indicators, right? Whether it's the ransomware risk indicators at the top, or even the MITRE attack mapping, which is really helpful because it just means as a security guy, I can figure out where do I need some additional control coverage to prevent these kinds of attacks. So, yeah, great overview. So Keith, what I might do then is let me see if I can grab the presentation back from you.
Sure.
And we can carry on, Drew. I mean, a fantastic demo and overview just to show how easy it is to gain access to some of those commonalities that we saw earlier around the regulatory environment, and how easily we can support the provision of that through Veeam.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, so let's move to the next piece. Do you want to take us through a real sort of life scenario, and we can sort of see how that plays out?
Sure. So you can see here, this customer has an infrastructure with lots of virtual machine that's running, and within the virtual machine, they could be running a variant of VMware, Hyper-V, and so on. They also do have some physical servers that's being deployed with Veeam Agent, or as well as desktops that's being deployed with Veeam Agent and protected with Veeam, right? So when a ransomware attack happened, so those little red spiders that you see is where the attacks have actually been taken place on the respective workloads, whether it's virtual machine, physical server, or the desktop. That's where Recon Scanner, as a digital forensic tool, builds a timeline events, because what we really want to see is the identification of scope of the servers and files that's being impacted, and more importantly, where are the potential backdoors that's being created, right? And of course, from this timeline or events, we are able to then share this across to the respective cybersecurity team in your organization. They can then use this timeline to pinpoint, right, when there was no evidence of compromise, right? And that timeline or servers that's been impacted are also passed onto the data protection team. And what's more important or critical from a data protection team is to be able to use a restore point before the threat actor was in the environment, right? We talk about a clean backup, right? So here is really when can we use that clean backup to do recovery, right? So that's more important because you don't want to reinfect the environment. And we will then kind of put this backup into a clean room, right? So that could be validated through our own Veeam Threat Hunter, our Yara True scanners, and also any other cybersecurity forensic tools, right? Where you could put in there, we'll mount the respective backup, even though we say that it's a clean copy, but we will actually scan it first to make sure that is indeed a clean copy before we even start to do any form of recovery, right? And definitely, this is not something that you are restoring like even one or two workloads. We're talking about massive scale of recovery, because that's where we are able to recover from a scale perspective and also from different multiple layers as well. And I think one of the big advantage of what Veeam can do is the different approaches that we can actually do recovery. So whether it's from a replication where we do a failover, all right, or it could be just a instant recovery that we could actually directly mount backups from the backup target, and the user can have instant access to the data set that's being restored. And also we mentioned about storage snapshot integration, right? So that's where we make use of the storage engine to do a quick recovery whenever we need to. And I think it's more important that we want to really have a faster RTOs to meet the requirements of the organization.
So what I like out of that as well, Keith, is security is that there's a lot that's going on. There's a lot of information from the backup environment that we can pass into the security infrastructure so that the security teams can also play a part in supporting this early identification of threats. So maybe you can sort of help explain a little bit more about some of the integrations we have with the large players in the security operations space.
Yeah, so you can see a little, animation that's running, but what essentially means is today, Veeam from a data resilience kind of posture, we're not only kind of covering the areas of data protection, but we're also looking at how do we work with the wider ecosystem that's there, and especially like you see from a Splunk perspective, Palo Alto, CrowdStrike, right? So today we're able to kind of share those incidents that we discover within the Veeam environment, and within the tools that you see here, whether it's Splunk or Palo Alto or even CrowdStrike that I mentioned, then they have actually a view to know what's happening. And it could be a bi-directional, kind of activity that Splunk can also send back a API back to Veeam to say, take a quick backup, for example, to do certain any other activities that kind of Veeam is being supported of, so that we could actually help to mitigate or even respond to any form of ransomware attacks, right? Incidents.
That's really important. I think that bi-directional capability, and I know we've just recently announced the same kind of bi-directional capability with Sentinel from
Yes.
Microsoft, and this ability for not just Veeam to be able to trigger alerts into the XDR or the SIEMs that organizations are using, but alerts that may have been generated somewhere else within the environment coming back in and being able to trigger automated events within Veeam as well is crucial. And I think
Right.
that automation applies across a bit more of the ecosystem, right?
Yep. Right. So definitely you can see all the respective integration. I think we started off with Seam integrations and then we move
Mm.
on to saw, EDR, XDR, like you mentioned. I think more importantly, I think we are not only depending on communications across different teams or people in the organization, but now we are using tools more effectively to be able to communicate if there is any form of attacks that has reached or breached the backup environment. Not only the backup team should be accountable for or even responsible for or even being notified, the respective security team needs to be aware of what's happening as well. And I think that's where we kind of can bridge the gap between the communications of these two, different organization business units there that's managing different parts of the environment within the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this really helps the responders, right? Because if plugging into ServiceNow means you're automating the flow of, tickets being created,
Right.
bringing intelligence from other parts of the organization and triggering new events. I mean, this is great. I think, with the demo and with this, you've really shown us a great end-to-end picture. And I think now we're at the point now where we can sort of bring all this together and summarize a bit more about what we've been talking. So to that point on end to end, maybe you can take us through now this sort of more holistic view of what we've been talking about.
Sure. So now in more visual view, right? So like I mentioned, before backup, that's where the proactive recon scanner that I've shown the demo earlier on will give you that stats and also building up that timeline. I think the security and compliance analyzer, all right, again, is part of the compliance security report that you see. So you want to make sure that your backup environment is also, tightly being secured. Of course, the incident API that we spoke about, right? The SDR, SIEM integration, SOAR integration, the respective wider ecosystem that we're built through. That will then lead us into during backup. I talk about using AI to do a ransomware detection. All right. So that's where inline malware detection is also in place. So we are able to kind of notify the users that there will be possible suspicious, malicious file that we are kind of protecting. And that gives you a second opinion or a second view because technically at the front, you will have your respective security tools that's already doing that detection as well. But this is kind of the second gate that they kind of flow through. And more importantly, from a post backup perspective, when we are using this backup data to do any form of recovery, that's where we do have the ability to do orchestrated restores and clean room, like I mentioned during the recovery orchestrator slides earlier on. Of course, you could specify very specific Yara rules engine to scan a very specific malicious malware if you want to kind of speed things up. Of course, we have both the threat hunter and the malware and blast radius scanner to know, right, how big has the blast radius be, impacted in the environment when you are hit with ransomware in those kind of situation. And of course, lastly, just to kind of bring through what Coveware is doing. So basically, Coveware is focusing on cyber extortion readiness and response. So that part of risk assessment, forensic analysis, that's where the recon scanner also comes into play. So negotiation and settlements, I think from a incident response plans, that's where when we engage a third party kind of vendor, in this case, Veeam, Coveware by Veeam, right, is to be able to, number one, do the negotiation on behalf of the respective organizations. And why is that key? Is because we have a huge database of all the respective threat actors that we have been negotiating, I think, for the past couple of years. And with those data sets, right, we actually compile them and we are able to kind of classify the different types of threat actors that we have negotiated before. And because of that knowledge that we have, we are then able to identify which are the respective threat actors that has came into the environment. And then we know, like typical, what will be the amount that they demand for ransomware, when will be the number of days, like for example, at the 7 days that they will give you probably a discount and so on. So behavioral kind of analysis has been done. And of course, the whole end objective is to end the entire downtime when there is a ransomware attack, right? Of course, we do also provide decryption tools. And part of the kind of prep activities that we'll do is we will often run the tabletop, incident response planning, as well as all the respective reporting. And most important is to provide a post-incident documentation, right? Because you do not want the same thing the same threat actor or a different threat actor coming through the same backdoor into the environment and then start to kind of, initiate that ransom across to you.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great overview, Keith. I think of the not just the technology capabilities that we have, but also the service capabilities from response, that complete end-to-end service. And I think if you want to just talk a little bit more about how we wrap that together into our program.
Yeah, so I think cyber secure program is something that wraps through things together. So really three main themes. We talk about protect, prepare, and preview. So under the protect category, we do have a dedicated program management, or there will be a dedicated program manager. So we do conduct like yearly architecture review. We also kind of give the organization a baseline, like where is your data resilience maturity, point at when we are doing the assessment. Of course, relevantly giving you the cyber security engineer training, right? And of course, the technical concierge, which is our technical account manager, because this person will be very familiar with what has been deployed from a Veeam solution perspective in the environment. And that's where we really want to build a strong, secure foundation from day one. And of course, on both the prepare and preview is to ensure that we carry on to have quarterly security assessment. We do executive security assessments reports as well. And also we give you these quarterly threat actor intelligence security briefings. So this is where I mentioned about, right? What's the latest trend for the last quarter that we have seen, right? From a threat actor perspective, have they changed some of their tactics coming into the environment? Has there been a reorder of the threat actors rating in terms of being on the #1 billboard, right? So it's really to stay ahead with what is the ongoing expert guidance, right? And we give you the up-to-date threat intelligence. Of course, the preview part, right, is really when an organization is hit with a kind of ransomware, then that's where we are able to do incident response. So you do have like incident escalation fast track. We do kind of bring through that cyber extortion readiness and response retainer. And of course, we give organizations up to 5 million ransomware expenses warranty, right? So this is really to ensure any organization is always ready to respond and the ability to recover fast, right? And of course, being confident to do so, and end of the day is to be financially protected.
And I think, when you talk about prevail, this is really what we've been leading to, right? If we think back to what we had started around the regulatory requirements and how they're aligned across the region, it's all leading to one thing, right? Which is resilience, the ability to prevail through an incident. So maybe I can talk a little bit more about what we've been doing in this space and talk about a maturity model that we announced earlier this year, which is our data resilience maturity model. There is a lot of discussion in the industry around resilience and what it is. And we felt like there was this requirement to really define what is resilience and how can we measure it and how can we use that to improve and drive resilience. So we went out, we partnered with McKinsey, we partnered with MIT to leverage research that they'd already done in this space. We took the question to other organizations like Splunk and Microsoft and Palo Alto and said, okay, so what does resilience look like? And it's a very agnostic view. It's not just our view, it's that collective view. Developed a questionnaire. That questionnaire was run across 500 different organizations, and the responses allowed us to map organizations on this resilience journey with these different horizons on where they sit, depending on the types of best practices that have adopted. And they've adopted those across their strategy, their people, their processes, and their technology. And we found that really only 8% of organizations are sitting at that very top, most mature mark of the maturity model, where they've effectively preempting outages and incidents, and they can prevail, as you mentioned, Keith, through that. And then we've got about 75% of companies sitting at these first two layers. So this is a great way for an organization to benchmark themselves, identify their maturity levels, and really map out that roadmap journey on how they can improve and use very real numbers to determine with quantitative views on how they can move through that maturity journey and use that to drive investment. It's usually a fairly lengthy process. It takes about 2 weeks to do a very comprehensive view. But if an organization wants to have a go at doing this, we do provide a pulse, which is a slightly faster way of going through this. It's essentially 10 questions. You go through it in a few minutes and it'll give you a bit of a view on where you are. And this is a great way for us to start a conversation and talk to you agnostically around where are you today? Where do you want to get to? And how do you map that journey out? So, Keith, I know we're doing a lot of work on this across the regions.
Yes.
What's your sense on the progress so far?
I think it's really widely accepted and adopted. And we have done a couple actually from a assessment with a few customers. And like what you mentioned, right? From the stages 1 and 2, we still see a lot of organizations sits between stages 1 and 2. And I think part of this, which forms up the cyber secure program, right? This is also where we want to make sure that from year to year, when we are doing the assessments again in the next year, you first set a baseline of where you are, right? And progressively, you should be moving like from stage 1 to 2 to 3 and to 4 ultimately. That's really the plan. And like what David mentioned, it's an agnostic survey. There's no specific technology that we are kind of putting in from sale, but
Right.
it's really more of a people process part of things that's also there, because what we really want is to make sure that this is being made visible to the entire organization and not just be on the backup admin part, which is really kind of one small business unit within the organization. Yeah.
Great. So, thanks, Keith. And do, I mean, there's the URL on the screen. Do reach out and take a look and reach out to us, ask for more. And with that, we've reached the end of the presentation. So I think, Keith, it's been a great session. Thanks
Yes.
for joining us and helping us to get through. You gave us a great demo and overview, and I hope everyone got a lot out of this. And look forward to some more conversations.
Right. Thanks as well. Thanks, David. Right. See you again. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.